The best of Money Matters. The Big Story.
Welcome to The Big Story. I'm Hongbin Jeong. For 13 years, Haidilao's Clarke Quay outlet has been a hotpot landmark with its long queues, impressive customer service, and the late-night suppers. But on August 31st, it's closing for good. And it's not alone. The popular Chinese hotpot chain has recently shut several suburban outlets too. The closures are happening against a backdrop of rising rents, softer retail demand in the city center, and changing consumer spending habits. So what does this mean for Singapore's F&B scene? Are we just seeing a reshuffle, or is the dining landscape in for a bigger shakeup? Well, joining us today to share more is Debbie Yong, who is the founder and brand strategist at Atypical Media and podcast host and producer of Turn the Tables. Hi, Debbie. Welcome to the show. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Hi, Hongbin. Thanks for having me on.
Well, Debbie, did the closure of Haidilao's flagship outlet in Clarke Quay come as a surprise for many?
Yes, I think it definitely did. I mean, judging by how many media outlets have reported on it so far, it's only been a day. You know, it has been an institution, as you said, since it opened in 2012. And I think the Singapore F&B scene has been undoubtedly become very challenging in the recent year, right? We've seen lots of closures and no one is spared, right? From fine dining restaurants to casual chains. But I think it is surprising because among local players, there have been some grouses and maybe some finger pointing towards the bigger foreign chains. I think particularly from China, as the Chinese companies venture out to Southeast Asia quite aggressively, given the slowing domestic market back home. And local players are observing that they are paying top dollar for rent, for talent, and they feel like, you know, these bigger chains have been pricing out the smaller businesses. So I think Haidilao's decision to close such a significant store, it is their store number one in Singapore, shows that even the Chinese players, even the big players, are not immune to this market correction.
Right. I mean, as you mentioned, Haidilao's Clarke Quay outlet is the brand's first Singapore location. So what do you think made this particular outlet and its closure so significant?
Actually, it's not only their number one outlet in Singapore, it's actually their first outlet outside of mainland China that they've opened globally. And I think, you know, what made it special was, I think they really changed Singaporeans' relationship with hot pot. You know, in a country where we don't really have before they open, we don't really have a culture of having hot pot regularly, you know, besides, you know, Chinese New Year. We don't have, you know, the four seasons, the nice wintry weather to enjoy a nice steamy hot pot on a cold day. And I think another thing they've changed is the perception of service in Chinese restaurants with Haidilao's customer centricity. So, you know, Chinese restaurants are not just loud places where the waitress is like really grumpy and like yells at you and clangs, you know, the cutlery. I think Haidilao really made the customer experience really fun. Right. And they had, you know, the theatrics of the noodle puller, the boisterous birthday celebrations, like the whole staff comes out and like sings for you. Yeah, so I think they were the first ones to do this in Singapore. I mean, now you see a lot of the Chinese chains in really, really good customer service. But because they were the first ones to do it, I think they really changed our perceptions. And that's why it feels like we are losing, you know, a part of our culture when an institution like that decides to close.
Definitely. I mean, when Haidilao first opened and everyone, it was a craze. No one had seen anything like it with that customer service, you know, having your nails painted while you're having hot pot. It was crazy. But, you know, the closure comes after more than a decade in operation. Plus, Clarke Quay is such a prime location. Why would a global F&B brand decide to exit such a spot, you think, Debbie?
Right. So Haidilao and CapitaLand have issued a joint statement, and they have said this is a mutual agreement that they took some time ago, and both sides wanted to, you know, have the opportunity to refresh their offerings. And I think you do see that, like, Clarke Quay has been undergoing recent efforts to rebrand from a nightlife spot to a more family-friendly, pet-friendly lifestyle destination with the construction of Canning Hill Piers, the, you know, very large condo nearby and some hotels coming up. And CapitaLand has also clarified that the issue, this is not about rent. And they've said that the new tenant coming in fact, paying less than Haidilao is. Oh. Yes, I think the fact that they could issue a joint statement shows that there was no dispute, that they still have a good relationship, and Haidilao continues to operate in, you know, other outlets in other CapitaLand malls. And I think for Haidilao, it's an opportunity for them to refresh. And, you know, when they came in, they were innovators. But now there's so many hotpot chains around, all and the diversity of offerings in, you know, just paces away from each other. So really, I think they're taking this opportunity to reassess the market market and right size.
Well, I mean, Haidilao also recently closed 3 suburban outlets in Bedok, Pasir Ris and Punggol. Do these closures suggest a shift in brand strategy for Singapore as well?
Yes, I think we can observe that. And, in recent earnings calls that Haidilao has had, their current CEO, Yang Li-Juan, who interestingly worked her way up as a 17-year-old waitress, in Haidilao's first store. And today she's CEO. Well, she said that the brand is looking to open smaller stores in Singapore and also incubate new brands beyond hotpot. And we're starting to see that. So last year they opened High Hotpot, which is their budget sister brand in City Square Mall. And it's more self-service. And I think it's a very astute move in Singapore, especially where the labor cost is very high and labor is scarce in F&B especially. Even if you wanted to, pay them more, it's very hard to hire people. So I thought that was quite smart. And also in the Haidilao group, they have other brands, mainly in mainland China, like Yanqing Barbecue, which, offers this signature Haidilao service, like you can wash your hair there and braid your hair. I haven't been to it myself, but I've heard good things about it. And they've also acquired other brands like Madame Zhu's Kitchen, which serves Sichuan and Shanghainese cuisine. And I think it'll be interesting to see them bringing in, some of these brands and maybe shake up, the barbecue restaurant playbook as they have done very successfully with Hotpot.
Right. I mean, Haidilao's Clarke Quay outlet, as you mentioned earlier in our conversation, wasn't just their first restaurant in Singapore. It also marked the arrival of the hotpot craze here. So do you think the recent closures will have any impact on Haidilao's branding?
In fact, I think if positioned well, I think it reinforces their branding as innovators and industry leaders. I mean, a lot of, Haidilao's success have been studied in management schools, right? From the way they manage HR to how they groom, their future leaders. And I think some of the current right sizing reinforces that. In 2021, Haidilao in China, they launched an aggressive, what they call the slimming down plan called Project Woodpecker, where they actually halted expansion and they closed more than 300 stores across China. And that had the effect back then of increasing the scarcity of the outlets. So people who became, sort of used to having a Haidilao around the corner, they treasured it more. And maybe perhaps that's the closure of Clarke Quay is doing that to us now, right? Like, when's the last time you went there? When they opened, it was a hot spot, but now it's kind of there, you take it for granted. Yeah, and after that right sizing process, since then, they've reopened more than the 300 stores that they've shut. So I think this strategy of constantly reevaluating and repositioning themselves has worked very well for Haidilao, and I think that's what we're seeing at the moment.
Okay. Well, back in March, a Haidilao employee also went viral for revealing that he allegedly earns a cool $10,000 a month. So should employees be worried as well with this situation?
Why would they be worried? That's a good amount of money. Well, I don't think there's anything to worry about. I think it's definitely a war for talent out there, especially in F&B. And, there will be more employers than employees. So, in fact, you have the situation now, right, where employees would move for just a slight increase in wages. So I don't think on the employee side there's anything to worry about, but for employers, for sure. And I think it's not just about the salary then. I think F&B employers today really need to think about how they take care of their staff, how they offer, learning and leadership opportunities to their staff because you don't want them to move for a dollar more. And also employees these days, of the younger generation, they're not just looking for salary, right? They're really looking for a place that they can grow with. And the employers who figure that out, I think will survive.
Right. Well, Debbie, if we zoom out here a little bit, I mean, this closure comes at a time when central region retail vacancies are rising and rents are inching upwards again. So when a flagship like this closes after 13 years, what kind of message do you think this sends about the state of the F&B market here in Singapore? Are these now unavoidable realities for big F&B operators as well?
I think definitely. I think one thing it shows is that you cannot rest on your laurels, right? Even when you found the template or when you think you've found a template for success, even when you've grown, you've scaled, even when you're now the big fish, you're the big player, you cannot guard against competition, right? Singapore is an open market. There will be younger upstarts. There will be, copycat brands. And the only way to stay ahead is to constantly reinvent yourself. And I think another thing is the importance of customer centricity because there is so much choice now out there, right? Like loyalty has become so much harder to earn. And I think that's something that Haidilao really excels in, with their loyalty programs, the gamification of like collecting points when you dine in, the service, how they remember your name. I think all of that now counts a lot more.
Well, Saville's latest report shows the downtown core where Clarke Quay sits is seeking slower take-up of retail space. Meanwhile, the vacancy rate in the central region has climbed to 8.2%, up from the 7.6% the previous quarter. So do you think the city centre is losing its dominance as Singapore's main dining hub? If so, where is that activity shifting to?
I think naturally we will see some adjustments as, our government urban planners make a push to develop the suburban hubs, like innovation districts in Punggol, lifestyle enclaves like Joo Chiat undergoing gentrification. So I think we will see, a spreading out of diners across the country. And I don't think that's a bad thing. I mean, the city centre will always have its appeal, especially now as more companies call people back in, to offices. So I think this is just a bit of a natural adjustment.
Okay, then how do these economic factors play into the decision-making for large F&B brands moving forward?
Yeah, so I think it's a great opportunity and really it's good learning for local brands. I think that, local players are often disadvantaged because Singapore simply doesn't have the scale, or previously, right, we didn't have the scale. And most people who build F&B brands here from scratch, they always think about the first outlet, invest all their time in it to make it successful, and then think, oh, okay, where am I going to go next? Like, where's my second outlet? And then figure out the SOPs for expansion. But what we're seeing, the Chinese players, and not just them, the Korean, F&B players that have come in as well, what they've done really well is they built for scale. They know, because that's what, they need to survive in their own countries, right? They know when they open, they're already thinking about their 20th outlet and what are the SOPs you need to put in place from day one, not on the fly, but from day one, the technology, the mass ordering, the economies of scale, all of that is planned for. And so I think, to our earlier point about the diners spreading across Singapore, I think that's a great opportunity, right, for local players to then think a bit more about that, right? Where would you scatter your outlets? Maybe have smaller footprints rather than the big flagship store. The big flagship store, start to plan out smaller outlets. Could you do a QSR version, a quick service takeaway kiosk instead? And with that scale, that will make our local players more competitive also to go overseas. And that's what I would be really keen to see, when Singaporean brands can replicate this network effect, across, other Southeast Asian markets or even, in Western markets.
Well, Debbie, consumer behavior is also shifting. I mean, so how much is this eating into the mid to premium segment of the F&B industry?
Yeah, so I think for sure in the premium segment, we're seeing so many closures in the fine dining sector. I think, what was it at last count? More than 10 Michelin-starred restaurants have closed in the last year because people just don't want to have 4-hour meals anymore. They don't want to be stuck behind a table. They don't want to pay $400 for, a special night out. And also, a lot more people are getting retrenched or getting put on contract roles. So there's a lot of volatility. People want flexibility. They're watching their budget. And at the same time, with the strong Singapore dollar, I think you're seeing a lot of, geo arbitraging, right? People going overseas for more innovative concepts at cheaper price point. And I think to fight that, local operators really need to dig deep into their USP, right? Like what makes your brand special that, your diners cannot get anywhere else, right? They can't get it in Bangkok. They can't get it in Ho Chi Minh City. Like what makes it Singaporean? That's not to say just fuse in your laksa leaves and lemongrass and whatnot, but really what can you offer beyond product, but also service? What are your brand values that will keep people coming back and customer retention? And how are you using technology, right? To not just to retain the people, not just attract them, but to keep them coming back, to survey them, ask them what they really want. I think there's a lot of focus now on, a lot of brands with the dampening diner demand. They're launching a lot of promos, right? It's just very loud, very noisy. There's always discounts here, discounts there. But once these people come in, like, are you retaining them? Do you know who they are? And all of that with the technology that exists today, all of that is possible.
So looking ahead, do you think Singapore's F&B scene will lean more towards international names or will local brands rise to fill the gaps behind?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really interesting question. I think we will always need a mix of both, and we will always see a mix of both. When the local brands thrive, that will attract the global brands to say, hey, like Singapore's a great market. Look at the diners. They're so diverse. They're so, open to innovation. We should definitely come to Singapore. And then when the global brands come, they bring new ideas. And I think the welcome competition, I think the competition when taken, on the right note with the right perspective, I think it's good to keep our local players on their toes, right? To keep them innovating, right? Don't stay put. Like, I want to see more interesting concepts as well as a diner. I want to be surprised. I want to find concept, service, fun, like gamified experiences when I go to restaurants. And beyond that, it's also, I think when global brands come in, they can groom our local talent pool with the ideas, with the SOPs that they've developed in larger markets. And that way, our Singaporean talent in the F&B industry can apply new ways, new perspectives of thinking about building brands made in Singapore for a Singapore market, but with the global know-how. And that, will contribute to, that is why our F&B scene has been so vibrant. And I think that competition and that tension between local and global will continue to keep our industry as vibrant as it is now.
Definitely some great insights and analysis there. Thank you so much, Debbie, for joining me today.
Thank you, Hongbin.
Thank you. That was Debbie Yong, founder and brand strategist at Atypical Media and podcast host and producer of Turn the Tables. This has been The Big Story with me, Hongbin Jeong.
To listen to more great interviews, download our podcasts at audio.sg or download the audio app. That's AWEDIO, audio at the App Store and Google Play.